He still had my face in focus when the dogs started barking. 3 of them military trained, no handlers in sight. The wind cut sideways through Tiergarten, but he didn't flinch. Just adjusted the lens. Click. Another frame. I could have run. I should have run. Instead, I stayed seated, right there on the stone bench, pretending not to notice the pattern scratched into its surface. It wasn't vandalism. It was a map, a signal, a threat. His Leica clicked again closer this time. I didn't blink. I wanted to, but my eyes were dry and the dogs had gone silent. That's how it started, with a photograph I never saw and a code I should have burned. Before I regret saying any of this, hit that like button. Subscribe if this is already making you uncomfortable. And tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is. I like knowing where in the world people still dare to listen to secrets like these. Berlin, January 1982. The Tiergarten bench faced the statues and the cameras we never noticed. The drop was scheduled for 1540. Same bench, same angle. 3rd statue to the left. I arrived 10 minutes early, like always. Not because I was eager, because I didn't trust early arrivals. If someone was already there, I'd abort. But this time, the bench was empty. Clear line of sight, trees bare. No school groups, no joggers. Berlin cold was good for silence. He showed up at 1538. Brown coat, scuffed shoes, Leica around his neck like a tourist. He didn't sit. Just walked past me once, circled the bench, then sat. That was the routine. That's what made it feel safe. I nodded. He didn't nod back. Just tilted the camera slightly, left to right. That was the signal. I passed the microfilm inside a rolled newspaper. He never touched it, just placed his own paper beside mine, like commuters ignoring each other. Then he stood up and left. I lit a cigarette and stayed seated for 5 minutes, scanning the tree. Line, no movement, no flashes, no tails. I picked up his paper. It was heavier than expected. Inside, a strip of exposed negatives. A test, a message, maybe both. On the walk home, something felt off. Not about the scene about him. His hands didn't shake. Tourists always shake in that cold. And the Leica, it didn't gleam. It was matte, too matte. German cameras age like whiskey. This one looked like a forgery. That night, I developed the negatives. Nothing sensitive. Blurred shots of trees, my shoulder, the bench. One image was focused on the brass detail of my coat. Another showed the base of the statue. No faces, but the angles didn't match the usual drop instructions. They were from behind me. That meant someone had circled the bench at another time. Either him or someone watching him. I checked my field manual for Leica specs. The sound of the shutter was distinct, like a small snap under tension. This one had been muffled. Too smooth, too dull. I called Frankfurt. Asked the quartermaster if they could ID the lens model based on image distortion and light bleed. He sounded tired. Said he'd check. The next day, I got a call from the secure line. It's not Leica, he said. It's Zenit Soviet, modified. Looks German to civilians, but not to us. I didn't sleep well that night. Not because I was scared, because I felt stupid. This was Tiergarten, my city, my bench, and I just handed microfilm to a tourist with Soviet glass. Langley told me not to act. Observe, they said. Stick to protocol. But protocol assumed the system wasn't compromised. And now the system had a shadow. I went back 3 days later. Same time, same bench. A different man this time, thicker frame. Different coat, but same Leica. Or so it seemed. He didn't make the pass. He didn't tilt the lens. He just sat there, smoking something that smelled like Polish tobacco dot At 15:45, he got up and walked away. Left no newspaper, no signal. I didn't follow, because I was already 3 steps behind. For weeks, I tried to cross-reference the faces, pulled photo files, border checks, entry stamps. The man with the Leica didn't match any ID in our archive, which meant one of 2 things. Either he was real, and someone inside had wiped his record, or he'd never been ours to begin with. And still, I went back, like a gambler returning to a rigged table, knowing the deck was marked, but sitting down anyway, because routine is the deadliest kind of trust. And that was the last time I sat on that bench without feeling watched. I didn't plan to review them. Microfilm that night. I was tired, and my heater had gone out again. Berlin's way of reminding you that comfort was always temporary. But something about that camera gnawed at me. So I set up the projector, locked the door, and slid the reel in. The first few frames were routine. Diagrams, updated safe house codes, transport instructions. All the right information, none of it urgent. But halfway through, the frames paused for half a second longer than usual, like the machine didn't want to keep going. The next image was darker, slightly blurred, almost cropped. At first, I thought it was a lab error. But when I adjusted the frame manually, I saw it, a pair of boots just behind the statue's base. Not mine, too polished, too still. I rewound, looked again. Then I heard a click, faint, not on the projector. From the hallway, I turned off the lamp, waited, nothing. Then again, click, metal on metal, not a lock, not a gun. A shutter. Someone was taking pictures through the peephole. I didn't move, not for 5 minutes. Then I packed the reel and flushed the developer fluid. The window was small, but I slipped through it anyway. Old habit. Better than a front door surprise. Next morning, I returned, expecting to find my apartment ransacked. But everything was untouched, except for the mail. A plain envelope, no markings inside. A single negative. It was me, sitting on the Tiergarten bench. Same coat, same cigarette, but something was off. The timestamp. It was dated a full week before the drop. I hadn't been there that day. So who was? I developed the image carefully. The angle came from behind the second statue, an area we never used for surveillance because of poor light. That meant whoever took it knew the blind spots we avoided. That wasn't coincidence. That was choreography. I reported it to Langley. They said the film might have been planted to spook me. Psychological operations, they said. Part of the game. But no one explained the shutter sound, or the fact that the image was processed in East German stock. That's when I remembered the sound. The camera's shutter during the last drop. It had been too soft. Leica shutters were snappy. This one whispered. I found the newspaper he'd left and checked the classified section. There, under the crossword, one phrase circled in red. Ilford XP2, not recommended. XP2 was a film type, British, rare in Berlin. And under that same ink, another line, barely visible unless tilted. Zenit has better eyes. That was a message, not to me. To someone watching. I started retracing every drop over the last 2 months. Each interaction, each handoff. I logged who sat where, who carried what. The Leica had been present 4 times, but the faces were different. Same coat, same camera, different men. It wasn't a contact. It was a costume. Someone had built a character around that Leica, and I'd fallen for it. Again and again. The reel I received that night, it wasn't a delivery. It was bait. And the man behind the shutter, he didn't want documents. He wanted proof I was still playing along, which means someone else was already watching the real film. The frost hadn't melted yet when I found it. I wasn't looking for a camera. I was checking for buried cables routine security sweep after a protocol breach. But 30 meters northeast of the Tiergarten bench, under a loose cluster of ivy, something glint ed dot. It was embedded in the soil, hidden beneath fake mulch. A camera. Casing scratched, power light faint, lens angled low. Soviet make, still warm. I didn't touch it. I marked the spot with a discarded cigarette and kept walking. Back at the flat, I filed the coordinates under an unrelated equipment request. Then I went back just after dusk with gloves, tools, and a small lead case. The camera had been live for weeks. Battery pack modified for cold exposure. Inside, half a roll of film. Unprocessed. I didn't risk the lab. I developed it myself. In the bathtub, every frame drying above the radiator, like laundry. Most were static. Trees, shadows, the same statue. But then the angles changed. One series showed the bench from behind, then from the right, then from above. That meant someone had moved the camera between drops, quietly, cleanly, not just to record me, but to frame the space. Like setting up coverage dot, then I saw it, the signal. In one frame, I'm nodding. In the next, I'm looking at the ground. And in both, his camera is pointed away. But the real camera, the one I just found, never looked away. Every gesture I made had been recorded. Every pass, every hesitation. That's how they knew what to duplicate. Not from memory, from footage. This wasn't just surveillance. It was rehearsal material. The next frame was worse. It wasn't me. It was someone wearing my coat, same haircut, mimicking my posture. Sitting where I sat, lighting the same cigarette brand. But not me. I compared timestamps. That series was shot 4 days before one of my deliveries, which meant they'd practiced being me before I even arrived. Langley brushed it off. Could be training for a false defection, they said. But I'd seen enough false defectors to know this wasn't that dot. This was substitution. Cross-referenced the camera's model with Cold War KGB equipment manuals we'd seized back in '79. It was a repurposed Velez 5, known for silent operation, and interchangeable lenses, used primarily in deep cover fieldcraft, and only assigned to operatives impersonating Western assets, which made the next discovery worse. The battery casing was engraved tiny, almost eroded with a familiar serial. It matched a shipment we'd lost 2 months earlier during a handoff in Prague. The equipment had been marked as missing during transit. That meant someone in our own logistics cell had passed it along. Not stolen. Transferred. The implications were clear. They weren't watching me. They were building me. Each roll of film wasn't about evidence. It was about construction. Building a version of me they could deploy, use, erase, replicate. I looked again at the statue in the background of each photo. Same figure, same bird droppings on the shoulder. Except in one frame. They were gone. That meant the photo had been taken earlier, possibly years ago. Meaning this wasn't surveillance of a single drop. It was archival, a library of me. And I had no idea who had access to the catalog. The man who showed up for the next drop didn't carry a camera. That should have been my first clue. He wore the same kind of coat, the same cadence in his walk. But no Leica, no signal, no pause before sitting. He just sat, smiled, and handed me a folded napkin from Cafe Adler. Inside was a list, handwritten. 4 digits, a street name, and a note. Repeat Tiergarten 3. Reverse protocol. I stared at it longer than I should have. Reverse protocol wasn't a phrase we used. It was something we trained to recognize as mimic code language used by double agents to rerun safe routines in order to flush out leaks. Except no one had issued a mimic code in months. And Tiergarten 3, that operation had already been completed. Successfully. I delivered those documents, twice verified, logged and closed dot, so why the request to repeat it? I didn't say a word, just nodded. Like I understood. The man stood, nodded back, and vanished into the foot traffic like he'd never been there. I waited 5 more minutes, lit a cigarette. It burned faster than normal dot back at the flat. I checked the archive. Tiergarten 3 involved courier intercept. Protocol's dead drops, burner contacts, and a decoy message meant to test loyalty from the receiving side. No reason to redo it, unless someone was using the same op as cover. To rewire the chain from the inside, I flagged it and sent a back-channel message to Langley. They replied with a single line, "Proceed. Trust vector calibration." That's not an answer. That's a stall, a cover phrase, a way of saying, we think someone's compromised. Keep playing dumb. But if they suspected someone inside Langley was dirty, why keep me in play? Unless I wasn't the one they were protecting. I was the bait. Next day, I followed the reverse protocol exactly as listed, except for one change. I swapped the dead drop location with a mirrored one, 2 blocks north, a location never used before. The switch was minor. Only someone with full internal access would catch it. 40-8 hours later, the item from that mirrored drop was flagged in an intercepted KGB cable. They'd retrieved it, which meant someone on my side had corrected my mistake. I was compromised, not just observed, integrated into their feedback loop. That night, I found a package under my door. No sender. Inside, a contact sheet of photographs from various drop sites, Tiergarten, Friedrichstraße, even a grocery store near my apartment. All recent. All accurate, all annotated. But not in CIA format. The labels used GRU shorthand, which means they weren't monitoring the operation. They were steering it, and I was executing instructions under their design. What haunted me wasn't that I'd been used. It was that I'd followed orders so precisely. They didn't even need to ask that I reported everything: dates, names, protocol shifts, even the altered contact sheet. I expected a direct order to abort. Instead, Langley told me to hold position. Maintain visibility, they said. Observe deviation patterns. No extraction, no replacement. Just more waiting. I started to notice it then. The delay in responses, the lack of follow-up. Previously, I'd get a reply within 12 hours. Now it was taking 3 days, sometimes more. And when they did reply, the phrasing was off. Too polite, too distant. Not like the handlers I'd known for years. They weren't talking to me. They were watching me talk to them. I requested encryption, key rotation. Denied. I asked for a meeting at the neutral checkpoint. Ignored. The next drop came with no camera, no contact, no pass. Just a brick on the bench with a cassette inside. I didn't play it immediately. Took it to a safe site, disconnected power, ran an old reel-to-reel recorder. What I heard wasn't a message. It was a loop, my own voice, pieced together from old day briefs, saying things I never said in sequence. That it wasn't for me. It was for someone else to teach them how I sounded, how I reacted. They weren't copying me. They were rehearsing me. I called Langley again, insisted on confirmation code from my original. Case officer. Nothing. Instead, they froze my channel access 2 hours later. Sighed I was being rotated for psychological recalibration. That was protocol speak for. We don't trust you. They kept me in Berlin. Same flat, same assignments. But all my secure links rerouted through Vienna, which made no operational sense unless they were isolating me from others on the ground. I was still in the field, but no longer in the loop. That week, I checked the Tiergarten bench again. No drops, no watchers. Just a child's mitten frozen to the stone, and a pigeon staring at me like it had been briefed at headquarters. No one met my eyes. One liaison asked if I was taking enough rest. Another told me my security badge was being reissued due to formatting updates. Both lies, both warnings. On Thursday, the building receptionist handed me my own personnel file. No explanation. Just the file. Inside, my name had been corrected in pencil. Not erased overwritten that the photograph wasn't mine. And under assignment history, 2 years were missing. Berlin, Budapest, both gone. I was being erased. Slowly, quietly, not disavowed, just overwritten. That night, I checked the safe in my flat. 2 things were gone: my last transmission key and the cyanide capsule issued 5 years prior. Only someone from inside could have bypassed the lockdot, so I did the only thing that made sense. I packed a small bag. I kept 1 reel of tape. I burned the rest, and I started writing everything down, not for Langley. For me, because I'd finally understood something they never taught us in training. Once they stop answering, you're no longer an agent. You're bait that knows too much. The codebook had always been my compass. Not the encryption keys themselves, but the cadence, the weight, the ink on the paper. We didn't just memorize phrases. We felt them, trusted their rhythm like a fingerprint dot. So when the intercepted Jew memo surfaced with exact phrasings from our Tiergarten protocols, I knew it wasn't coincidence. They hadn't cracked the codes. They'd received them verbatim. The memo listed standard procedures for contact, extraction, and fallback sites. But the language wasn't Russian. It was ours. Not translated, not mimicked, copied. I ran a deep cross-check against our internal drafts. One phrase in particular stood out: observation must precede rapport, especially under birch canopy. That wasn't just unusual, it was mine. A line I drafted for a Berlin asset in '81. It had never been transmitted. It lived only in my outbox. And in the GRU file, that meant the leak wasn't from surveillance. It came from within. Requested a formal breach trace. Langley denied it. Insufficient basis for internal escalation, they said. But the next morning, my entire secure drive was wiped. No warning. No logs. Just a single message in its place. Leica model 1967. Verified. At first, I thought it was confirmation. Then I remembered something else. The real Leica model we used in '67 had a shutter defect made a double click under pressure. Ours had been modified, silenced. So who verified it? And why did they use that phrase to acknowledge a data wipe? That same day, I noticed a shift in behavior. My neighbor, quiet woman, Czech descent, always fed the pigeons, suddenly started taking photographs. Same time, same corner, same lighting. Always when I left the flat, I changed routes. She adjusted. She wasn't watching me. She was mimicking my pattern. That's when it clicked. It wasn't about what I did. It was about recording how I moved, how I looked in different shadows, so they could instruct the double or replace me cleanly. I went back to my earliest briefing. Notes from Berlin typed on a worn Olympia machine. On the back page was a faded stamp I'd never noticed. Echo copy issued Archive 2. That wasn't our protocol. We didn't issue echo copies. Unless the file was meant for dual use. One for us, one for them. The betrayal wasn't singular. It was systemic. I pulled old photographs from Tiergarten. Not the ones I'd taken, the ones we kept for signal history. Dozens of them. In nearly all, there was a wristwatch on the bench beside the sea. Paper. Always the same brand. Same angle. Same time. 3:41 p.m., but in my own logs, the drops had been scheduled for 15:40. 1 minute discrepancy. Every time. It's not an accident. That's a signature. Someone had been watching both ends of the protocol, ours and theirs, and controlling the overlap. Deliberately. Precisely. So when I looked again at the Jew memo, I realized something worse. It wasn't just a copy of our code. It was cleaner. Edited. Streamlined. As if someone inside Langley had rewritten our entire playbook for export, which meant we weren't just compromised. We were subcontracted. It took me 2 weeks to confirm his death. Not because the records were hidden, because they were too clean. The real photographer, the first one with the Leica, had crossed into Poland under diplomatic clearance a month before our first Tiergarten meeting. Routine check, they said. But the log ended. There no return stamp. No extraction. Just a gap. I found the lead buried in an old intercept file from Warsaw, an unconfirmed incident near a checkpoint. A Western male, civilian clothing, no ID, body unclaimed. The height matched, the coat matched, and the camera was found. Beside him, broken, German make, like a body. But the lens had been swapped. That confirmed it. He never made it back. And the man who sat on the bench with me, weeks later, wasn't him. Ran a secondary biometric check using the old surveillance photos. Jawline was close, too close, but the ears gave it away. You can't fake cartilage. I brought it to Langley, or tried to. My handler had been reassigned. No explanation. His office sealed, his phone disconnected, his name removed from the rotation list. I spoke to a liaison in Frankfurt. He smiled too much. Sighed maybe I was overprocessing old data. That phrase, overprocessing, it's what we used when we didn't want to call someone paranoid. I took the hint. So I flew to Warsaw on my own credentials. Posed as a cultural attach. Took a train to the checkpoint in question. The morgue file was sealed, but I found a janitor who remembered the body. He called him the ghost with no face. Said someone came to collect the camera. Not the man, just the camera. 2 men in gray coats, Eastern dialect. Diplomatic plates. They didn't ask questions. They just took it. I returned to Berlin and cross-checked the personnel files of anyone who had interacted with the photographer. 1 courier dead in a car accident. 1 analyst reassigned to Lagos. 1 technician disappeared after taking medical leave. They weren't cleaning up evidence. They were cleaning up context. The Leica itself reappeared in a Langley equipment audit 6 weeks later. Listed under a different inventory code. No explanation. No notation, which meant someone in procurement had signed it back in without logging. The field incident. A dead man's camera. Recycled into active use. Then came the worst part. I pulled an internal requisition form from the archives, dated 2 weeks before the original photographer's disappearance. It was a request for a Tiergarten-compatible asset replacement. Handwritten initials. No name. They'd planned the switch before he vanished. Either they knew he was compromised, or they orchestrated it. And all that time, I was passing. Microfilmed to a ghost wearing a coat tailored to someone else's measurements. Because no one in Langley ever noticed the switch. Or worse, they noticed and didn't care. I wrote the report 3 times. First draft was clinical names, dates, deviations. Second draft added my suspicions. The third, I burned. It felt too close to the truth. I kept the second copy. Slid it into a secure pouch. Delivered it in person to a trusted courier with clearance to transmit to Langley's Berlin desk. He sealed it while I watched. Logged it, gave me a nod. That was Tuesday. By Friday, nothing. No acknowledgement. No receipt. No follow-up. I checked the logs. The packet was signed for by someone I didn't recognize. A name not in our system. I filed an inquiry. No response. Next day, my keycard failed at the main entrance. Security said it was a glitch, a temporary format mismatch. Protocol. Language for You've been flagged. Inside, my access had changed. No longer full clearance. No archives. No foreign asset files. Only regional support duties. Which meant you're not needed operationally. But we're not done with you yet. My desk was moved. No window. No phone. Just a lamp, a typewriter, and a locked drawer I didn't have the key for. I asked about my handler. They said he was on assignment. I asked about my field reviews. Still under review. I asked about my pension. They laughed. That weekend, a new agent was introduced to the team. Younger, clean-cut, assigned to Tiergarten operations. I wasn't asked to train him. I wasn't even introduced. He sat at my old desk, typed on my machine, smiled like he already knew the punchline. I walked by once. On his screen, an old field report. Mine. Redacted. They weren't just ignoring me. They were absorbing me. I returned home and opened my safe. Inside, the courier receipt was still there, but now stamped in red. Not for field circulation. Someone had reviewed it, classified it, buried it. That night, I wrote a final version of the letter. No codes, no formalities, just the truth, what I'd seen, what I suspected, what they'd done. I never sent it. Didn't even seal the envelope, because I knew then what I hadn't wanted to admit. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. It was that they already knew, which meant the only part left to erase was me. I hadn't planned to cross into MIT that day, but my route was being shadowed. Same man. 3 days, too careful for coincidence. So I shifted patterns, boarded a tram I wasn't supposed to use, and ended up near a Soviet-owned department store. Not the kind you browsed. The kind that watched you back. I stepped inside. Fluorescent lights humming. Empty aisles. A woman folding sweaters stared without blinking. And then I saw it. A mirrored column near the perfume counter. At first, I didn't recognize the reflection. Same coat, same height, same cigarette, but the man staring back wasn't me. He was too still, too precise. As if the reflection had learned to move first. He lifted a camera, framed the shot. Click. No flash, no expression, just the shutter. Then he turned and walked toward the escalator, disappearing into the second floor. I didn't follow, didn't move, because I knew what that was. It wasn't surveillance. It was a message. Back at the flat, I tore through old contact sheets, compared posture, shoulder slant, gait rhythm. It wasn't just someone playing me. It was someone rehearsing the part with my own notes. Even the way he adjusted the camera strap, left shoulder, twist once, pull down, was something I'd taught to a junior asset years ago, which meant they weren't building this doppelganger from guesswork. They were using internal training footage. Mine. The next morning, I found a package outside my door. No return address. Inside, a photo, black and white. Me, at least. That version of me standing outside the CIA annex, smiling, holding a classified folder. I'd never posed for that. Worse, the photo had been stamped clearance confirmed by someone with active credentials. They'd inserted him, not as bait, as replacement. That night, I opened every mirror in my apartment, turned them all around, not because I was afraid of being seen, because I didn't want to start believing. The face in the glass was his. Langley still hadn't responded. My badge still worked, but only for floors no one visited. In the cafeteria, the new me sat with others. They laughed. He mimicked my voice, my stories, and no one seemed to notice, or maybe they did. I called my sister in Ohio, just to hear someone say my name. She paused, said someone had already called her, said I was fine, said I'd been reassigned, only I hadn't told her anything. And I never said goodbye. That's when I stopped shaving. stopped going into the office. Because I realized I wasn't under suspicion. I was already gone. And that thing walking around Berlin with my voice wasn't trying to be me. He was making sure no one remembered I ever existed. It was just after midnight when the call came in. A defector had crossed at checkpoint Charlie. Male, American, mid-40s, claimed CIA credentials, new protocol phrases. Said his name was mine. I got the alert from an old contact on the East German side, someone who owed me more than a favor. He said, "You might want to sit down. This one's walking like he owns your story." I went straight to the observation post, showed my badge. The sergeant on duty blinked twice, looked down at his list, and said, "You're already inside." They'd already processed him, given him coffee, logged his file. I asked for the intake sheet. He'd listed my hometown, my cover job, even my high school football injury. All accurate. Down to the scar on my left wrist, but the signature wasn't. Mine. It was neater. Practiced. Like someone had been copying it. For a while, I demanded to see him. Denied. Operational quarantine, they said. Then I saw the log. He'd been authorized by Langley's European desk. My desk. I called in a favor. Got a look at the surveillance tape from his entry. He moved like me. Same limp on the left foot. Same habit of tapping his ring finger on the desk before answering. But he wasn't acting. He believed he was me. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just a replacement. This was a transfer of identity, of memory, of file. They weren't erasing me. They were redirecting me. I checked my own file later that night, pulled an offline copy from a microdrive I'd hidden years earlier. The serial number on my last field report matched his. Not close, exact, which meant one of two things. Either I'd submitted it and someone copied it over, or he'd written it and I was living on borrowed text. Langley confirmed receipt of his debrief. Said he'd returned with valuable insight. No mention of me, no cross-check, no anomaly. He left Berlin the next day, boarded a flight under my clearance code. Destination classified. I stood at the gate, watching the plane take off. Security didn't question me. They just let me stand. There, as if I were invisible. Or worse, as if I no longer had the right to question who I was. That night, I walked back to the Tiergarten bench. Same trees, same silence, and a fresh cigarette butt still burning near the stone dot. It was my brand. And it wasn't mine. The film canister arrived in a brown envelope. No return address, no markings. Left inside my mailbox with surgical precision. I almost didn't open it, but something about its weight felt familiar, like it had waited too. Long to be touched. Inside, one roll. Unlabeled, I developed it in silence. Not one document. No maps, no codes, no briefings. Just faces. Dozens. All framed the same way. Neutral background. Eyes center. Expression blank. Mugshots. But cleaner. Intimate. Like someone collecting portraits for a photo exhibit on ghosts. And then there I was. Third row. Fourth from the left. Same coat. Same wrinkle near the collar. But the eyes sharper. Like the photo had been taken before I knew what fear was. Next to me. A face I didn't recognize. Then another. And another. But the pattern was clear. Each face resembled another I'd known. Contacts, handlers, assets. But not quite. These weren't targets. They were rehearsals, a training set. I laid the photos out in rows, started matching them against archived field photos. Some were almost perfect, others, like shadows trying to stand upright. One frame showed a man I'd never met until I did. He'd been assigned to me 6 months prior, supposed to be my backup. Now here he was, smiling into a lens he shouldn't have known about. The bottom of the roll. A group shot. 8 people, all staged around a table. One wore my watch. One held my old badge dot, and one sat in my posture, hand curled the same way I did when reviewing intel. Like he'd studied the way I breathed. I turned the photo over. One line written, in block letters, "Redundancy is efficiency." A paper smelled faintly of fixer and varnish. Like the old photo labs we used before digital noise took over. I called no one, filed no report, because it was clear now I wasn't being watched. I was being archived. That I opened my old equipment locker. Inside was a fresh camera. Leica. Brand new dot, no request filed. No serial number. Underneath it, a folder. Inside, a new identity packet. Different name, different birth date, but my photo. My scars. All it needed was my signature. And I knew someone else had already signed it, which meant my final mission wasn't to escape, it was to vanish. Perfectly. Snow had settled on the Tiergarten paths like a white hush clean, undisturbed. I hadn't been back in years. Not to the bench. Not since they'd rewritten me. But that morning, something pulled me there. Call it reflex. Call it stupidity. Same trees. Same statues. Same silence. The stone bench was still there. Not chipped. Not replaced. As if waiting, I sat. Same angle. Facing the path. Pigeons watched. A cyclist passed, slow and disinterested. No one cared. No one knew. I lit a cigarette with hands that didn't shake anymore. Not because I was calm. Because I'd already burned every part of me that mattered. There were no drops. No watchers. No cameras I could see. But I knew better. The lens isn't always metal. Sometimes it's memory. I reached into my coat and pulled out the last reel, the one they hadn't found, the one that wasn't meant for anyone but me. Faces. Doubles. Copies of copies. I dropped it under the bench. No container. Just celluloid on concrete. Let the cold chew it. A boy ran past, laughing. He didn't look at me. That was the first real sign I'd disappeared. I stood, looked once more at the bench, tried to remember. If the first time had felt this quiet. It hadn't. Back then, it felt like a job. Now, it felt like a grave, and I walked away without looking back. Because ghosts don't say goodbye. If you made it this far, maybe you were meant to hear this. Subscribe if you want to know what else never made it to the files. And tell me in the comments, did you already know about any of this? Or did I just ruin your sleep?